All right, so welcome to Helping Customers Help Themselves. My name is Jay Brewer. I'm the Vice President of Experience Design at Rapid7. Ultimately, I've kind of changed this talk a little bit from the topic because we've actually made a lot of progress since I submitted the talk. And we're going to include some stuff about a mission control element and an idea of guiding your customers after you help them and learning from what you've done to help them. Tao Doan is here. Hi, Tao. Who's my head of learning, who I've done a lot of this stuff with, along with Gwen, some other folks from Rapid7. So after we start to wrap up, they'll be able to answer a lot of questions as well as I can in the last minutes. The goal really is like, how do you actually drive customers through your experience, give them that self-serve methodology that they all want. They don't have a lot of time, and how do you move them through the experience and give them great learning? So we've got this metaphor that we've been using at Rapid7, which is all about getting people to Mars. We're pretty excited about this SpaceX stuff with Elon Musk and crew. And the notion is like, you know, when we think about it, it's a pretty crazy mission that our customers have to go on to actually get through our products, and to get someone all the way to Mars who would actually be alive and could live on Mars would be a pretty cool thing. And we think about, like, even after that, it would be amazing for them to then be able to go out and explore Mars even after they're in their habitat. And I think that's how I frame a lot of the conversations with our teams and working on our products, and especially talking with our customers, is that we understand that they have a lot to do, and it's a big task and a big dream for them to be successful. So if you don't know that much about Rapid7, Rapid7 is a company that provides security and data analytics solutions for customers. It's a really kind of time-consuming thing where we want to make all of your credit card and consumer data and everything secure so that you can go about your day and be on that mission as well. And actually, when I was about 3 years ago, I was looking to have sort of a switch in my career where I before was working on all these cool video games, right? And everyone's like, wow, like you worked on Lord of the Rings and DC superhero games and Dungeons and Dragons, and like you're going to security. That seems really weird. And ultimately, it was really fun making all these games, and something I really was passionate about. And I loved helping people catch the Joker. That was really great. But when I thought about like doing something different with my life and making something more meaningful, I was like, I could actually help people's livelihoods maybe in healthcare or other things. And then security came up, and I had a conversation with some people. And then one of the things that I really liked about the mission at Rapid7 was there really is just an open and sharing community. And that's why I'm going to share a lot of stuff today that we've learned about the stuff we find in security, and then also the things that we're doing to help make our customers more secure. So ultimately, I want to say, and I was very inspired that I saw this morning from the talk, was why do you use Pendo? It's like, when we implemented it over a couple of years ago, it's because we really just want to make our users more secure. If they can't get through our products, if they can't actually get help, if they can't set up those sources to collect all that data, then they're not secure. And if they only use a third of the product and it takes like 90% of the stuff to be set up, then all of your information here is going to be out the door, and you'll be getting calls about all those credit cards and Teslas that you reserved that you didn't really want to with your credit cards. So the thing that's interesting about security software is it's really frustrating. It's really, really terrifying. It's so bad. It looks kind of like that actually in the background. That looks like IBM's web scanner. So when I started looking at security, I was like, wow, this is really bad. Like, it takes a lot of setup. The stuff looks really terrible. I think I can make a difference here. Right. So ultimately, we wanted to make really cool experience at Rapid7. These are actually some of our dashboards and stuff that we do to make our customers actually understand what they're doing in their environment. And I'm going to go through an example of Inside IDR really quickly. It's a product example, because you need to kind of understand how complicated it is to get somebody in a security product and get them through to be successful. So this is Inside IDR. It's basically, you can see that it's got a lot of information, and there's risky users and KPIs about all this different data that they're collecting. This map actually represents all these different locations where people are logging in across the globe that might be at your company. And then ultimately, if someone gets an alert in security, they get this timeline of stuff, which we think this is a pretty good experience, but we're not totally sure because we want to make it better. But there's a lot of data that is in this timeline, all these different places where we're telling the security practitioner, hey, this is where people might have gotten into your network and are doing bad things. And what that does is we actually put that in a view that says like, well, actually it's a lot of stuff, but really it's involving your firewall. And Martha Green here has her computer wide open. And also it looks like it's triggered off a bunch of these different honeypots. And honeypots are things that people shouldn't be actually accessing. So they're kind of fake traps. And so we can tell that maybe this is an attacker. But in order for a security person to really know if that's the case, they end up having to take that information and then go add a lot more information to it. So they add endpoint data. So your phone, your laptop is endpoint data. They add more network data to see how big the hit would be. And then they actually look at the raw logs, the events on the servers and stuff to do it. They push that all into a timeline, and we actually look at that data, and we look at it and we say, like, actually, it's not just Martha Green. It's actually a lot more stuff that's been affected. And ultimately, that leads a view to where we can see that Martha has accessed all this stuff, and it's affecting all these assets. And ultimately, it means that it wasn't just Martha Green. It was that all these people were actually infected and causing this problem on the network. So that's a lot of steps, right? And not even showing you all the different types of views. But it is really important to know that, like, we're asking them to go on this crazy mission with us. We want to make it easy, but we also need to help them and guide them through it. And that's one of the ways that we improve the product is by learning, but also by understanding what the steps are. And Pendo's really helped us with that as far as funnels and trials. So if we can learn from them and guide them through all these different touch points, then we felt like we could basically improve their experience, and Pendo was really instrumental to that. So we look at customer touch points in this framework of aware, engage, use, and evolve. And we do that so that we can kind of hone in on different points of the experience and then look at that. And what we started to do last year, since I was at Pandemonium, is that we really started looking at that self-serve experience. We started looking about how we could guide them, how they were getting help, what they were doing, which products were they interacting. We started to do a deeper analysis of that. And ultimately, that meant that we were actually affecting a lot more people in the company. So it wasn't just product experience and UX, it was the learning team, it was customer success, it was support, it was sales, in order to really do a good end-to-end job. This is my buddy Ranjan, who's not here, but we love to take pictures of Ranjan, and we do a lot of really hard work to make the products better. And in the past, like, we would run a lot of workshops and do a lot of things, and we still do this, but it's time consuming, right? And so, like, how do we kind of scale this effort up and learn it? And when I thought about it, like, our current method of what we were doing without sharing all the information was much like the best we could do was really get a robot on Mars, right? And so, like, we've got everybody there, but we're not really able to put one of those, like, real live human beings or astronauts onto the planet. So I thought about this concept with my counterparts, Stephanie Fafara, who works in customer success, and it said, like, what if we had like a NASA mission control? There's all these dashboards and stuff in Pendo. We have analytics that we have in Domo. What if we start designing experiences for these different people in the company so that they could be successful and start to guide the customers and their points on the touch points? So the thing is that what we ended up doing was coming up with 3 or 4 different areas of the company that we wanted to affect. One of them was the help and learning team and how our customers were accessing that information. Another one was how we were actually interacting with Pendo guides and the trials and our experiences. And then also ultimately how we were going to work with the data science team and the business intelligence team to wrap up a lot of that information and share it out and start to arrive at a health score. So last year when we were at Pendo, we had this notion of a product engagement index. And that was basically taking all the activity that we were seeing in Pendo and seeing, like, hey, these customers are really engaged. Let's look at those customers and see why they're engaged. And then for other customers, like, why aren't they logging in? What's going on? Are the guides effective? But it didn't really lead to an idea of how we would guide them on a deeper mission control. So ultimately, if we're going to get an astronaut all the way there so that they can actually do their job, it's going to be a fair amount of work. So how do you help them, right? Like maybe we need our own mission control. And when we looked at this, like we said we need to know what they're doing. We need to know how we're going to help them. And we need to know whether or not, even after we do that, they're healthy. So that's some of the stuff you heard this morning. Like, it's great to launch all this stuff, but in the end, is it effective and are they actually healthy? So, so let's start with like, what are they doing? Right? So in Inside IDR, we talked about this product. There's a lot of stuff, right? And so when you get Pendo, and you might be starting it yourself or you're along the way, you can use the heat mapping to start to figure out like all this stuff that's in there. And it's really great. And you can say like, people love the map. Let's make sure that we invest more on the map. That's one way. But at the same time, when we tagged everything and people went a little crazy, I mean, it's a big product. So it has 521 features. How do you make sense of that? So we worked really hard and said like, this year we're not going to look at it like this about all the dots and making better dots and moving the dots to the left to the right. We wanted to basically figure out how they could just get to set up the product. So we looked through a lot of the product experience, and we worked with the Pendo team to create a custom guide for us that would allow us to set up the product a lot easier. So we spent a lot of time and analysis going through like, they really just needed to set up a collector to get started. They needed to basically start gathering some data, and then we would actually populate the product and get that going. And this was part of our trial effort, but it really led us to start to organize our thinking a lot better, which also led to, hey, let's actually look at the activities and group those 521 features into 3 big buckets. So if you remember this slide here, delivering on the promise, right, that you say you're going to deliver your customer, and we were just going to talk about trials, it's like if they can really unify their data, detect really bad things, and prioritize what to fix, then we should start tracking those activities in our product, work with product management and other folks to say, are those things actually getting better? So we did that, and this view is actually a Domo view where we started collecting this and pumping all types of Pendo data up into Domo and doing an analysis on it, which really led our teams to say, like, we can make that number better. So if you're looking for a way to have a goal, that really did lead to some really great product improvements, some discussions. We found a lot of areas of these 3 activities in the product that weren't really being utilized. So maybe you could, lop that stuff off. And ultimately, this led to, like, even if we want to do that, like, how do we actually help them, and are they actually having problems after the fact? So when I think about a knowledge funnel, I think I started talking about this with Tao actually, and the thing is that we had no way of really engaging with the customer when they were frustrated on the actual knowledge base. We have an online knowledge base, and we also have documentation that's online and some documentation that's in the product. But the problem is that we really didn't understand what the gaps were. So we wanted to say, like, hey, if they had questions and could ask us questions, could we answer those questions or figure out if there were gaps? And then if we found that stuff out, could we add that to the knowledge base? And that would actually help support and the learning team get better at their jobs and know what the product gaps were. And ultimately we could say, hey, when these things aren't working and we're still getting questions about this stuff via support or from this portal, could we actually improve the tours? Could we tell product management what was going on? And that also ultimately led to a lot of product improvements inside IDR. And what it looked like was we have this rather limited but very useful ask and answer area that just says, like, hey, do you have a question that we aren't currently finding in support? You've seen this on Apple's site, on other sites. And if so, someone will answer it, and it will be from an approved Rapid7 source, which was another frustration our customers were saying, like, we had sunset our community, and they were very frustrated in that community experience by saying, like, we get lots of answers from people in the security community, but we actually don't know whether or not it works because it's not coming from Rapid7. So we realized this was also a promise activity that we could recruit a team of people to answer these questions and ultimately support the learning team, and everybody was getting smarter, which led to much better documentation where we could take the learnings from there, put it into the documentation, and ultimately this documentation, would improve their product experience or or hopefully in the future we could add it into the product. And then we instrumented, I don't know if Raul's here or in the audience, but Raul from the learning team added this ability to say like, hey, and with Michael too, sorry, Michael, if this is something that was useful to you or not, and if it wasn't, tell us why. Which also led to the fact that even when we were answering their questions, there were gaps, or they thought that they were in one of our other products, right? Or they thought that they basically had the right information and they can't find it. We're like, that's actually not even a feature in the product. And so this whole funnel was really great for us to really say like, yeah, everybody knows their customer really well at Rapid7, but ultimately there's just all these little gaps that aren't being filled in and that we can improve things. So we're excited because now you can start integrating a lot of the help and stuff with the Pendo launcher into the product itself. And you'll also be able to tag key areas of the knowledge base that you think represent really the best stuff to be on this page. So we've started to experiment with some stuff like this within the product on tooltips, where basically it links out to articles directly in the help. But we're pretty excited to be able to actually have it in the product. I know it's not $19.99 and we're not at Macromedia, but like seriously, that's pretty great stuff for someone in security. It allows them to do the work right in context. So the next thing is that now we felt like we were really, maybe we could do this, right? We're working really well with our customers. We're working better with other areas of the company. Maybe we can get across that next chasm, that big journey that we want to get on. And we started looking at one of our other products inside VM. This is a vulnerability management thing. It allows you to scan lots of things and find out that there's lots of holes and that people are going to get onto your laptop and do all kinds of horrible stuff. But ultimately, we found that like through the ask and answer that we were getting all these questions on the remediation part of this, which is like when someone finds something that's a problem, it says this is how you fix it. So people didn't even know that it existed in the product. So we started this really great walkthrough and light boxes, and we ended up reducing like the support cases from, I don't know, it was like 60 or 70 a month down to a few, just because people got started with it. It's a really easy to use feature. It only has like 3 or 4 steps to get you going, but we just didn't have really good enablement of it. And ultimately, it's leading us to start using the NPS to say like, for this particular feature, like what's going on with it, and then following up with really good questions to find out that information. We have some pilot projects that we've been running. We don't see NPS necessarily as something we want to do as a blanket thing, but we definitely want to know targeted feedback when we want to launch a new feature or we want to basically understand why someone's having problems. I love the notion of getting the 6 or 7 and then and saying we're doing a great job. But ultimately, if you don't know what the follow-up questions are, that qualitative data that you get from like, can you share specific feedback? Or, hey, by the way, you gave us a low score. Why did you do that? We get so much good juice out of that, just like we got in the ask and answer area, that I highly recommend doing that or asking a poll. It'll get you that qualitative information. So this actually led to us saying like, well, now we actually have all the support and escalation data. We actually have some trial data where we actually have some sales information and other stuff. And we've got a rich learning experience from the product features and all the things that we've kind of simplified down, right? We've been able to say like how these products are doing in 3 or 4 key areas, not across every single feature, trying to improve everything. So the thing is that we still got a lot of pushback saying like, yeah, well, that's fine, but like, if you use health score, it won't let you find those diamonds in the rough. And we're like, well, yeah, I mean like, and security people are interesting. Like they're very worried about those really extreme edge cases because they're constantly thinking about the little thing that they left open in the back door where people get through. So the whole notion that you could actually understand the population of whether or not people are healthy was pretty challenging. But what we ended up doing was really communicating out like, it's not really about specifically knowing, but we want to generally know how well we're doing. Let's sell that concept. And we ended up hiring a VP of customer experience, along with the fact that I run experience design, to really message this and start to bring it into customer success. And that was a big investment because we'd shown a lot of progress over the year. And Stephanie and I, along with Tao and other folks, had been able to really demonstrate that. And the way that we demonstrated it initially was like, hey guys, like if we make people happier and they use more of our features, they'll be more secure and they'll be using more stuff. The up and to the right is really good. But when we ultimately wanted to communicate this broader, we said like, how would we look at a population of our customers and really kind of segment them off? And so what we did is we took this data that we mapped together and we produced, this isn't real, but like, here's an example of how your population of customers could be. And we found out we actually had quite a few healthy customers, and we had some people in that neutral and sort of unhealthy, and very unhealthy ended up being an interesting bucket to look in. But really, if you're going to affect change, this is the biggest bucket in the middle. It ends up being the ones that are kind of in that state where you want to push them over. So we created a way for customer success to basically look at a customer and look at these 3 different areas. So they said like taking all the product adoption data, which is the data we're getting from Pendo and other stuff, looking at their number of support cases and the questions that they're asking, and then just saying like, have they purchased a lot of stuff? Are they renewing on an annual basis? And that's a business intelligence question. So we brought all that data into this calculation to kind of put them in a range. So now when someone in customer success wants to figure out what's going on, they can say like, hey, check it out. They're pretty unhealthy because they're really not adopting a lot of those key features in their product. Actually, they don't have a lot of support cases, and their purchasing behavior is meh. They might not have a lot of support cases because they're also not using the product a lot as well. But now they can call them, and we can actually give them in Salesforce information, and I'll show you that on how that looks. So like I said, this ends up being a mixture of product adoption, the support experience, the purchasing behavior, and ultimately the customer feedback is how we calculate our health score at Rapid7. And Travis Turney is here as well. He's going to be on a panel, but like if you want to talk to us and how we calculate it and the data that we collect, we're more than willing to share it with you and talk you through it. So now we had to ask a question. Do we have enough data for our mission controls, and could we start rolling these out across the company? Could we make those NASA dashboards for other folks? So ultimately, Pendo has a lot of this stuff built in, and they've been adding a lot of stuff. Here's an example of if you wanted to look at multiple products, like we actually have 7 products that we're tracking in Pendo, and this is an example of some Pendo data, but like you can actually track these on one thing and see how, for instance, their time on site across the different products is being used. And why this is really important is that we actually have platform managers that actually manage a bunch of products across a bunch of different categories. And they want to actually see how their products are performing relative to one another. And they also want to understand how quickly different types of products are being adopted versus other products. So like you might have one product in your portfolio that takes a few days for someone to get up and running, but you might have another product that actually takes a week, but you might want to sell those as a bundle. And what does that really mean? And what's that relationship? It's a great way to look at it. You can do this right in Pendo. And by the way, since I've had so many interruptions, is it 3:30 that I'm supposed to be wrapping up? 3:40? Great, okay. So another one is this customer feedback mission control. So using the NPS data, looking and asking targeted questions about different features or feature sets, you can figure out for the people that are happy, which features they use the most, and also which features the people who really like it use the most. This is a great way to basically go back and forth between different groups of people and figure out what those bundles of features are that are really working. And do they map to the thing that you are trying to track? And for the case of Inside IDR, it was investigation, prioritization, and remediation. And the thing is that that was our best guess. What we found actually is that there's like bundles of different roles and profiles. Some people like to dashboard. Some people like to do other combinations of behavior. And we're starting to get kind of emergent profiles out of that in some of this promoter data. And then feature awareness and adoption over time. So I actually did pull some data from some of our trial stuff just to show it, so like we could be a little transparent. But like this is actually which features by which accounts are being used. And over here is like, of those features over time, which are the features that are actually holding on. So in this one, this is one of our dashboarding features, this add a card button. And we found this really frustrating. Like what people really wanted to do was actually add a bunch of cards at one time, and they were literally having to add a card over and over again and wasting their time. So we were working on redesigning that. And then what we found in the top features over time was that there's essentially a lot of features, like I said, that go really well together that we didn't really know. And so product managers can use this to say like, hey, let's look at different slices and dices of what works well. So like if you've got maybe an online, card company, and you know that people like to make business cards and they also like to print out like headshots, you could find out those areas of the product and group it. And Pendo can track this stuff for you if you set it up and tag the right features. Another one that's a little bit bigger here is that this is a feature awareness and adoption over time. So this is basically like looking at a previous period and a current period and looking how things are trending. You can also do this in Pendo. We're doing this for one of our trial products called Insight Fish. And it's a cool product that allows you to basically send fake emails and see if actually at your company you're not paying attention and you're willing to give up all your credit card information. I love to try to fish my boss, but he still hasn't taken up the bait. But we're looking at this, and you can also use this feature awareness over time and set it up with cohorts. So you can actually look at groups of segments of customers and see how they're trending over each other over time. One of the things in that product that we found out was that we were getting a weird drop off after 25 days, and it was because we were limiting the number of phishing campaigns that they could do. So about 25 days, they'd run out of the 10 campaigns, and they were like, well, I really kind of like this, but I just want a little more time. And so what we did is we said if they got to that point, we just automatically granted them more campaigns, and now we're seeing a lot of lift there. So this is a great one. And then also, like they've announced this, and this is really true, you can actually have multiple dashboards for all this stuff, right? So I can make a dashboard for Gwen. I can make one for the learning team for Tao. I can make one for customer success with Stephanie. You can make and configure, and then they can configure those dashboards so they can get the different views that they want. And the reason why I think that's important is that some of the stuff we showed you is really cool that we have it in Domo, and I'm going to show you some stuff that we have in Salesforce. But I think people try to boil the ocean sometimes and don't just use the thing that you've got to get started. And that's why, like, if you just look at what's built in right now to Pendo, it's a lot of stuff to get started with and start experimenting instead of having to go outside the product. But I think with the integrations that you're collecting data that you can enrich with other data, it's really cool. So that leads us to this crystal ball thing that everybody at Rapid7 loves. So after, even like I said, after you show them all the stuff in Pendo and you improve the product and trials get better and their support cases are going down, they're like, tell me how I'm really going to impact the business, right? Like, how am I going to make more money? Does this thing actually return more investment? What's the dollars look like? So one of the things that we've done is we're actually taking a lot of this different data. And I showed you earlier that unhealthy customer that was only using around 40% of the total features that we think make them healthy. And a customer success person and salesperson used to just see like, hey, Adam Moses looks great. But now they can actually pop up and see these adoption metrics, right? And this is a mixture of data from Pendo and from other stuff, but we think leading indicators from sales and how we're trialing is that they need to do these different things like install an agent, activate a collector of all this data, respond to a security alert. And this actually makes it so that when our trials are going through, we're not calling them just because they activated a trial. We're saying like, hey, if they do this stuff, we think that they're pretty qualified and we can have a really good discussion with them on the phone. We just saw a trial thing in the morning. What was the site about? It was like a Jazz HR. And they're like, yeah, well, we got to this point where we realized that following up with someone to call them was much better. And we still believe that in security, like though we get people that will actually pay with a card or invoice directly. Once we know that this stuff's happening, it's a really interesting conversation. The person on the other end usually is like, oh yeah, this thing's got alerts. I just found out my CEO logged in China and his iPhone is all screwed up. And so the conversation is really meaningful versus if they only do half these steps that they're not likely to purchase or have a good conversation. So this also led us to a free trial mission control, which actually we have a bunch of these kind of half-baked web pages right now, but we're bringing in the number of trials, the number of different products across so the product managers can look at it, and then seeing what the accounts and visitors are doing, and then seeing actually what our drop-off and our qualified leads are. 10 minutes? 20. Okay. And so this has led a lot of people to be able to come in the morning and say like, hey, like what's interesting is that we actually have a live business. And I think that's another point, that once you get to the point and you start sharing all this information around the company, people start realizing that there's actually people out there using your stuff all day. Now, in video games, that was really easy because you'd be like, I'm going to log in. There's hundreds of thousands of people playing the game. Well, we actually have tens of thousands of security professionals that are using our stuff all day long, getting alerts. And people were like, they just think like, well, which feature am I going to build and what's going on? It's like, actually, how many more people came to our platform the next day? So it's a great way you can track this. I mean, you could also do a tag and using Pendo to sort of activate a trial and track it in there with a metric. This has been great for our sales. This ultimately leads also to some ones that we have in Domo, which is about looking at what our shelfware index is. So for all the products that we're selling, how much of them aren't just being used at all, right? They just sit there 0. And that helps us kind of keep that trend like a goal to make sure that people, like, we don't want that shelfware index to go up, right? We definitely want to close the gap. We realize it's never going to be 0, but it also shouldn't be like 20 or 30%. And then when we can also look at different customer views and say like, hey, given this per customer, what's the customer in this segment doing? Like, how are they growing? And so when we look at different groups of customers, we can say like, wow, we recruited all these people on these trials. How are they trending? And that's actually using a variety of the data from Pendo, like I said before, where we look at their activities and we see how those activities match to new groups of folks. Like, so we might go out and recruit people from a trade show, and that might be great for a security trade show. But when we recruited people from AWS who aren't security people, their adoption was very low. And the reason why it was very low is because they don't really know anything about security. And so our onboarding and training and stuff needed to be totally different. And that was a great way for us to say like, well, this number is normally 70%. It's like 15. What's going on? So it's a great way to look at different segments and stuff. You can do this within Pendo. We end up doing this with Pendo and Domo. And then ultimately, this led us to a mission control for customer success. And we worked really hard on this. We actually had Travis Turney, who's here, who's going to talk on the panel. We have this concept of a moose tank at Rapid7, and boy, I have to go into the whole moose thing, but we're all one moose at Rapid7. It's like an internal thing, and we kick off these Shark Tank-like things where you get funded. So they get funded for the tune of like $25,000 to $50,000 to pull together a product that we really feel can impact the business. And what we wanted to do was look at our products and understand what the renewal risk was, and then figure out which renewals that we really wanted to focus on. So up here in the green area, these people with a bunch of calculation, Pendo data, renewal data, like location data, all kinds of different types of data represent a lot of money. And the bigger the circle, the more money it represents. And so that allows a customer success person to log in and say, here are all of my customers. Which are the customers that I really could focus on today or in the next 30 days that are coming up for renewal? And I can click in, and then they can get those views in Salesforce. They can get their adoption views. They can then go call that customer and say, like, I'm going to focus on getting the people out of the yellow, and that represents like $3.5 million in business, right? And so that makes it much easier for them to come in the morning and know that they can affect change, which is what we want to do for our customers when we make great products. But they also want to get them engaged. And then when we look at a lot of the customers in the danger zone, we can have those tough conversations with them on why they're in the danger zone and what's ultimately going on with them. So one of the things that we learned too is that even though there were lower engagement, we started doing a calculation in the yellow where they had a high win probability. So they had been engaged or had fallen off, and we have different ways to slice and dice this. But this is a mission control for someone who is in Domo. There's a Domo view of this, and we also have some proprietary views of this using some other stuff. But we started to make these for all the products once we made this one, and it's rolled out across the company. And I'll be honest, it affected like a lot of money. And so it was really exciting to know that like 2 years ago, we started collecting all this Pendo data. We used the data in 2016 and 2017 to make this predictive model from Pendo, from the historical record. And then we added other data that we had collected in Salesforce and stuff to then make this model. So it's pretty cool. If you want to learn about this, there's a white paper on it that I'm sure Travis would share. If you want to understand how to start working on something like this, we'd love to share that with you guys and make you successful. So ultimately, here's some of our data science team. We are in the process of rolling out a bunch of these mission controls in all of our offices. So there'll be different mission controls for product managers. We'll have a mixture of product managers board, like product development boards, customer success, customer support. And we've created these different dashboards for people to actually understand and come in and realize that, wow, you can actually affect change if you actually know what's going on. And you can log in each day. Here's Quan looking at the health index, and Roy and Vasuda. Pretty exciting. We had these, definitely when I worked in games, and it just is pretty cool to come in and be like, oh my gosh, there's 30,000 people logged in Germany, right? And like people are like, I'm affecting 30,000 people's lives. And as we roll these out, and we have one in Toronto office for our data collection, people are like, I had no idea that we had 250,000 agents deployed in China. Right? So that's the kind of stuff where they're like, wow, that's a really cool investment. And the product manager has a conversation and says like, yeah, maybe we should look at that and see what we can do to improve the Chinese downloader or installer or whatever. So that's what we hope to have as a conversation going forward with these different mission controls. And I think ultimately it leads our customers to also understand where they might go with us, in the future, and how we would guide them, or we could also start sharing this information with our customers. I think a lot of our customers want to know also how the products are being used, how secure they are, how deployed they are. And now that we've started to get that, we've started in our managed services to offer an understanding of like, hey, we realize you're spending a lot of money with us. Are you getting a lot of value out of it, right? So Envision does this, other companies do this for our customers, so we really want to do this for them. So ultimately, that's where I'm going to wrap up. So thank you. So I think I have time for questions, right? 13? Wow, 13 minutes. Perfect. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, sure. Yep. Yeah, okay. So 2 questions are, what are we using for our knowledge base? And then what languages are we supporting? So for our knowledge base, currently, we are using readme.io, correct? And we use their question and answer thing, which is great and has given us all that learning. And we also use that to create a knowledge base that's integrated into that. And then all of our documentation is also in readme.io. We're currently actually exploring moving because we've kind of hit our limit, and the ask and answer area needs a lot more. People are really engaged with it, and they want better functionality than maybe README can do. However, I will tell you the folks at README are phenomenal. They have helped us and done a lot of really cool stuff with unified search and whatever. So if you have one product or maybe a few products, it's great. I think we just sort of hit a head limit when it got to be 8 to 10 and 6 writers, and it just got to be pretty crazy. On the language support, so I would love to say that we're awesome at this. We're not. If security people, we do localize some of the products in Japan and China. All of our content that we have in the products are localized in lots of languages. So if you want to fix something, the interface might not be completely localized, but the ability for you to fix it in Tokyo or fix it in Korea, that content would be localized for that version. So we focus on that mostly. We think that that's the biggest bang for our buck for localization. But we do actually allow you to switch the language. The knowledge bases themselves, we do have a version of Inside IDR that we're going to be putting out in Japanese. But it's just because we're growing a market there, not because, we just don't have the scale to localize all. And what we've done with the documentation in that approach is that it's always changing all the time. It's not set in stone. So we have this notion of micro packages and micro changes. So as things come in, they just go into the knowledge base, they go right into the doc, they go right into the product and get improved, which leads a very tough turnaround time to do string changes. We're exploring some options there. So yeah. Yeah, so it had big impact. And a lot of the things were just conversations and education for customer success in general, not knowing who to call and always looking like they didn't have any information when they called. But oftentimes we found when we kicked off a small project with about 50 customers that we targeted. What we found is that at more than a third of those customers, our champion had moved on, right? And though you hear that a lot, it was really easy to know, like, hey, one of the likely indicators of these people that are in the red zone are probably because there's nobody there who was using it, or they've changed, or maybe they've switched software. But in general, it was, no, we love that thing. It just, the guy who's using it or the woman who was using it isn't there anymore. So that was one thing. We ended up finding some stuff where it was like frustration with how we did support and how they were getting support. We found a lot of frustration when we went from the community. We had this big community where people could answer questions directly. And we found that engineers and customer success people were writing handmade SQL queries and doing all this stuff for customers and doing really great support in the forum. No one was getting the learning, and the customer would then not have a track record of it, and then they would break when we updated because we did all this custom work that no one knew about. So what we ended up finding was all these kind of really cool things when we actually knew to call, and we could kind of see a blend of their activities. And most of those customers, and a lot of those customers in the red, went into the yellow to green zone easily. And then we often found that some of them, their business had changed. So they were less focused maybe on scanning and patching and more moving to the cloud. So that ended up finding a lot of transformation of business problems where we're like, oh, we don't actually have a program to get them from on-prem, which is you install it on a server, to the cloud. We should put something around that and start to look at that for renewals. It just ultimately also made people in customer success more, they're just empowered to understand what the questions are. And since the learning and knowledge base was online, and they could use the guide center and launch it with a customer and say like, hey, by the way, this is there, like you could use it. They are really empowered to engage with a customer without going to them and starting with a blank conversation and then ultimately not having anything to offer them. Because our help used to also be, before last year, it used to be stuck in the forums in PDFs, which is terrifying, really terrifying, yeah. Other questions? Anybody? Michael? Yeah, go ahead.
On your NPS to feature slide, was that something real? Was that actually from your product? Because you had a feature that was a major detractor. I'm wondering what
It's yeah, it's not real.
Okay.
I can't show you all our data.
Did you have a scenario like that? And if you did, what steps would you take?
Oh, okay. So like your question is, if we had a detracting feature, what did we do? So I can give you a great one. So what we ended up finding was we have these two products. One's called Log Entries and one's called Inside Ops. And they both share the same search thing because we bought Log Entries and we were transitioning everybody into this product. So we found that basically like the search button, this big group of people started piling up on the search button, that it was like in Log Entries, like everyone hated it. And in Inside Ops, everybody loved it. And we're like, but I think it's the same page. And ultimately what we found out was we had broken it about 30 or 40 days worth of time in Log Entries due to the way that it was configured into the page. And so that feature wasn't really a detractor, but it was a big detractor with a group of people. And then we ended up fixing it for a bunch of browsers and stuff that was one. That's a great break example of like, this doesn't really make sense. And had we not been able to do that analysis, then, it was weird because we just saw that our top features were trending down for big groups of customers. It is a good way. I mean, you definitely have some things a holy grail and it's like a big feature. It should kind of maintain a little bit. And definitely when you make changes, you'll see it slide and come back as people adopt it. So it's one way that we really like saved our butt with Pendo. I wish, we talked about this yesterday, but I wish we had some alerts on key features, especially as they get untagged or people like mess with them. I would love that. That would be great. But ultimately, if you make some dashboards and people are doing their job and they have goals, then people started to look at the data a lot more. So yeah, definitely.
Along the same lines, I mean, have you been able to do any studies on their data on features cannibalizing other features? If you introduce a new one, do you have a feature that shifts from a promoting feature to a tracking feature?
So I would say I don't have that, but I definitely we've definitely looked at like we're launching a new feature. What does it do to the load of the other features that we think are the high performing stuff? So we launched like new reporting with Inside IDR, and it's a different reporting thing with like you can make your own dashboards and cards. And we had dashboard libraries where you could just load up libraries, and that was actually really important. And what we found was that people then didn't use the one where you started with a blank slate and they just used the dashboards, and it basically that all the work that we had done because we wanted this really cool custom experience. Like once people got it out of the box, they didn't want it. So ultimately it meant that we didn't have to maintain this other thing that we had spent a bunch of money building. We shouldn't have built it. But that's what we've seen. We've used it when basically we're launching new areas of the product to understand, is it dropping off other good behavior that still is important? Is it too much load? We have another version of the Insight IDR product that's a slimmed down version called Insight UBA. And what it does is it's only about tracking risky users. So it's about like everybody here works at Rapid7 and we have all of your devices and your laptops. And it just basically looks at where you're traveling, whether or not we really think it's you who's logging in, and whether or not you're doing weird things that you don't normally do. And what we found was when we started tracking that is that there was a group of people that really loved a much, much smaller feature set, right? And so we were like, we were going to kill that product. But that product has like 100% growth and adoption. Like the people who use it absolutely love it. And they do two things. They track risky users, like I said, and they also look at all the cloud services that are running on their network that they set everybody to stop using, right? So it's for a smaller customer, but we would never have known that had we not looked at the two products side by side and that they were the small and big version of it, which is a great way for the product manager to be like, well, maybe that's actually the trial version of our product, and they graduate to the bigger version of the product. Sure. Cool. Any other questions? Yep.
So earlier you were talking about how for you guys it kind of makes more sense for you to use kind of feature or page specific NPS instead of just kind of an overall.
Yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit more about why you guys arrived at that decision?
I think that ultimately that's where we're going because I think that a lot of the people that have worked where we worked have been burned by NPS at a global scale, right? Like everyone in the company is chasing the 7 or the 8. And so I think my head of research, Lisa Douglas, who was here, if she heard me say, she'd be mad at me because she's like, you can ask questions and get feedback, but it's a feedback tool for us right now. And we believe in the polling, some feedback, asking, doing follow-up questions, or if we get people who are unsatisfied, doing it that way. So that's how we want to instrument the NPS. That's how we've been following up with questions. And we just feel like that's more meaningful for us to affecting change. And it also kind of reflects our knowledge funnel of like, we really want to interact with the customer as directly as possible, but scale that effort. So that's why we're there. I think if we started, what happens at a 1,000+ person company with 8 products, and then they're like, let's roll NPS out across everything. And you're like, I don't know, let's try it here and there and start to learn and then figure out how we want to instrument it. I do believe it done well, and over time with a continuum and directed, I think it's an awesome tool. So, yeah. All right.
What have you learned about when customers might not want to be interactive with or where your over messaging
like when their hair's on fire and all the credit cards are going out the door. Yeah, that's one. Like you don't want to pop up guides for that. That's bad. Not that we've ever done that. Then that's interesting. I was actually sitting next to PagerDuty, the lead UX from PagerDuty yesterday. Name escapes right now. But they created, one of the reasons they got Pendo was they were guaranteed they could make a segment to say if customers were in an escalation thing, could they actually like key off of that to make sure that no messaging popped up? And I was like, wow, that's way easier than what we're doing. Because like we're looking at a bunch of other stuff and trying to, like, I was like, wow, well, you should just look at we should look at whether or not they have like any alerts that they're responding to. So that was one answer. We've also found a lot of people like don't want to answer a question that's specific. They like open-ended questions. We found that a lot on our drop downs and stuff, that they just want to say like, wow, this is really cool, or like this button is odd, and you don't really know what it is, but it's like a good pressure relief for them, I guess. But now with Pendo, we can get better targeted questions there. I don't know. We don't have a lot of complaints. I think that we get more complaints when we over email them or whatever than the guide fatigue, because we allow them to use guide fatigue. And I will say what we found from the Jazz HR, is that what it was? That things that are more, hey, check this out over here, like more of a light box and more of a like a tooltip kind of thing, they like that. The tours are great, but the tours, like they tend to do them when they want to do them, and that's why we put them in the guide center. And we find out if we block the screen, that is an absolute no-no. Everybody hates it and they think the product's broken. And then every time we put up one of those, even though marketing loves to do a takeover, like we've now proven to them that it's not going to happen. So that's that. Cool. Any other questions? Wow. Well, thank you so much, and sorry for all the technical difficulties. Cheers.